Uh, Pete, your hair is growing.
It is.
Yeah.
My hair tonic.
Okay, welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. This is May the 17th, 2020. And our guest today is Leslie Lutz, author of Fractured Tide. Hey, Leslie.
Hi.
Hey,
thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Let's do introductions. And do you have a prize today, Matt?
I sure do. I'm Matt Carpenter. If you do the eZine movie night, you see me then. Well, you don't see me, but you're with me. The book today is a short story collection by Charlie Strauss called Wireless. It's a nice hardcover edition. The main story of interest in here is his very famous Cthulhu Mythos story, A Colder War, but all of the stories are interesting. If you want it, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put Wireless in the subject heading. In a few weeks, we will choose a winner. It could be you.
All right. Could be me.
Well, it could be.
Rick.
Introductions?
Yes.
Rick Lay, writer.
That does it. Pete.
Pete Rawlick, alcoholic.
That reminds me of that scene in, what was it, 1408? Whatever the movie was with John Cusack, the Stephen King movie.
Yeah.
And Samuel L. Jackson says to him, do you drink? And John Cusack says, yeah, I just told you I was a writer. So.
You were alive in 1408, huh?
Huh? That was a pretty good movie, I thought. Bridget.
Hello, I'm Bridget. I write music and make art things, and big horror fan. So hello, all.
And I think, Ben, you're the last one.
Ben Handelman. I am just glad that Rick didn't get skipped this time for introductions.
What? I'm still getting used to Zoom. Jeez. Make one mistake. They never let you live it down.
Richard Bunting?
Yeah. See? Now I forgot somebody. Anyway. Rich.
Hey, that's all right. I'm Rich.
Wait a minute,
bald,
how did you
used
get
to
in
have
there?
a beard, but I still have a library.
Okay. Before I start, and this link is in the show notes. Of course, we're all sort of struggling right now, or most of us financially. And I just want to say I'm really appreciative and blown away by the kindness of eZine followers. I posted my PayPal.me link last night in a couple of social media places, and said, give me $1 if you can, keep the lights on. And a lot of people are doing that. I really appreciate it. And I've got that in the show notes if you feel like doing it. And if you don't, that's fine too. So, Leslie, thanks for being on the show. Can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about your book.
Yeah. This is my first published novel. We were talking a little bit before the show went live. I'm from all over. I grew up in Michigan, England, Mississippi, and then finally moved to Texas. So I think that kind of helps me brings. I'm always an outsider, and I think outsiders often become observers who then use that to write quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I've written 4 manuscripts, not counting the really bad fantasy novel I wrote in high school, which I only wrote half of it, so it doesn't really count. But this my 4th manuscript serious attempt is the one that actually found a home. So I'm really happy about that. And I write for young adults, but for short fiction, I write adult short fiction, like some things I've written have been considered literary, whatever that means. And then something, which is just a story, but some things are more on the speculative side for adults.
Well,
and poetry. I write poetry too.
You'll have to tell me about that too. Fractured Tide it just came out, what, last week, something like that?
Yeah, May 5th.
May 5th, right. Um, I really enjoyed it. It is a young adult novel, but it's one of those young adult novels that can be, adults can read it as well and really enjoy it, and I did. Um, Before we talk about Fractured Tide, I think I read somewhere that tell me about the road to publication of Fractured Tide, because you got these other manuscripts, and I read that you sort of didn't know what to do, and you followed someone's advice about starting a new project. Can you tell us about that, and then how you
Yeah.
got this published?
So the first book I tried to write was literary fiction on long form, and I didn't really. I think I was just trying to impress my professors, honestly. I mean, if I have to be honest about it, I think I didn't know who I was yet as a writer, as a person, and so I reworked this thing. It must have been almost a decade, and I just couldn't let it go, and I kept revising it, but it was flawed from its beginning. And then I got some advice. It says that once you finish a manuscript, put it down and start a new project. You can always go back and mess with the old thing, but start something new. You've already finished that story. It's time for a new one. So I took that advice and I wrote the next thing, and then put that down, and then I wrote the next thing. And all the while I stopped querying the first project because I just finally realized that it was never going to work, which was hard. After, it's almost like a marriage or something. You put all this time into it, and even though it's not going to, if it's a bad marriage, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
But you don't want to let it go because you've already invested so much time in it. But finally, that fourth manuscript, I went to the DFW Writers Workshop Conference, which I don't know if you've heard of DFW Con and the DFW Writers Workshop.
Yeah.
They're a great group of people. They've been around about 40 years. They have this awesome conference, and they bring agents in to the conference. You do this kind of like speed dating thing with agents, 10 minutes to pitch. I had done the conference 3 or 4 years and queried, or I had pitched the two novels before, which were young adult. And by the way, after I finished that literary fiction and then put it aside, I realized I needed to write something that I truly love, the kind of thing that when I relax at night, what do I want to read? Well, it was young adult. It was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It was Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation. It was Stephen King. So I thought I need to stop trying the literary route and do this. And so when I was pitching these new projects, finally I pitched Amy Bishop at Distel, Goderich, and Beret on this Fractured Tide story. And then she had me send pages, and she signed me. And after that, everything changed. So she's been a really great agent. And it took about a year to sell it to HarperCollins Blink. And I've been really happy with them. They're a smaller imprint inside of a big machine. And I like having, being able to reach people. I like just that I'm not battling with 100 other authors or something like that. There's a small group that comes out every year. And so it's been great.
I think that's a good lesson too for, well, not just writing, but any type of art at all. What you said about finally deciding to write what you wanted to read or what you like to think about, instead of thinking about the market or trying to impress anyone else, just creating what, I read about game designers, a game designer one time, that he said that he designed the type of games that he wished other people had designed so that he could play them. So what you said reminded me of that. Can you give us like a spoiler-free synopsis of Fractured Tide?
Yeah. So Sia, the main character, has been working on dive boats since she was really young, and she took over a lot of the work when her father went to prison when she was 15. So he's incarcerated. She's helping mom on the dive boat. When the story opens, she thinks she's just taking everybody out for a regular dive. Look at the fish, go explore a sunken ship, and then everything goes wrong. They end up shipwrecked on an island somewhere off the Florida Keys that shouldn't exist. And the shipwreck, this is not a spoiler because there's like a giant, there's a little clip on the back of the book that talks about the giant eye of the monster. So the monster causes this disaster, part of it. And she and 3 other survivors, all under the age of 18, end up shipwrecked on this island. And they think that surviving is just, find enough wood, build a big fire. There's no fresh water on the island, so she has to make freshwater converters out of garbage she finds. And if they just wait long enough, maybe the Coast Guard will come. But deep down, she knows something's wrong with this place. It's a sense that's dogging her.
Right.
That the world's not right. And then when they start experiencing these time loops on the island, they know the Coast Guard's just not coming. And they've got to find a different way to figure out how to get home. And also there's a mystery component trying to if you think about the structure of the book, it has a mystery arc. It's not a mystery in the sense of somebody trying to find the murderer. It's what is this place and why is it so odd?
Right. I think it's been in the Amazon synopsis. It's Lost meets Stranger Things type of feel to it. It definitely got that Lost vibe, better done Lost vibe than Lost.
Yeah, I actually did not come up with Lost meets Stranger Things, but I think that the marketing folks were really smart to put the two together. On the Stranger Things, there does have a little bit of that in there, but it's definitely more Lost than Stranger Things. I've had some people say Lost meets Sphere, which actually I haven't read, so I don't know. But
I didn't either, but the movie was kind of interesting and weird. It was structured. It did like chapter titles. You guys remember that in the movie? Anyway, yeah, I didn't see the Stranger Things as much. But definitely the Lost vibe. Maybe the Stranger Things because they're young adults. I don't know. But
there's also the idea of there being timelines happening simultaneously, or not timelines, but like a dimensional issues.
Right.
That there's some like dimensional rift. So I kind of see that, and also just how there's sort of the grossness of the monster, and there's the Stranger Things monster, how some of the visuals on Stranger Things kind of match.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't say this about. There are many good books that don't hook you right at the start. You have to keep reading until it hooks you. But Fractured Tide, I felt, just grabbed me from the start, where you just got to keep reading.
Well, thank you. That's a huge compliment.
Yeah, and the interesting format is it's kind of a journal format, but I don't know if journal format, but Sia, the girl, she's a 17-year-old girl, the protagonist, and she's writing all this to her incarcerated father. What made you go that route as opposed to, third person or even first person?
Yeah, when I first started writing this, I didn't intend to write it as a letter. I wrote 100 pages of it as a B horror movie, teens stuck on a boat. I wanted the whole book to be on the boat originally. And I wrote those 100 pages. I don't know. It was by 100 pages, I was done with it. I didn't want to read it anymore, and I didn't like anyone in it. That's a terrible feeling. But now I've learned my lesson, because I did that thing 10 years where I did all that work on that first manuscript and couldn't let it go. And now I know when to just toss it. And started it again in a different setting. Still didn't work. 40 pages in, threw it away. But I was reading a book that was an epistolary novel, and the person writing this, there were 6 stories in it, and one was a letter. And I love the idea of writing a letter to somebody and you never get to hear the response. You're just throwing all this energy into this void, almost like a message in a bottle. And I thought I started writing it that way, and suddenly it felt right. It just felt like I want to stay here in this story. I want to write this. I have to get it to its end. And I think the other reason why I wanted to do it specifically to somebody in prison is because I actually have a little bit of personal experience with prison. Now, I have not been in prison, which would be fine if I were, but if I have not.
What did you do, Leslie?
Huh?
What did you do?
Yeah, what did I do? What have I done that I have not been caught for?
Exactly.
So I'm a teacher. So I used to teach, and now I'm a freelance editor and writer, but I taught for a long time, and I got it in my head I wanted to go teach prisoners. So I read this article about teaching poetry to prisoners, and I got all, oh, this is going to be so awesome. I'm going to bring poetry into the prison, and it's going to be amazing. And I talked to the warden this was back in Atlanta, of the Atlanta women's prison, and he says, yeah, we don't need poetry. We need GED teachers. So if you would like to come in and teach fractions, please come in. So I taught a once a week GED class, and I learned a lot when I was doing this. And the first thing I learned is that my perception of prisoners was completely formed through television and movies, and was false. And that I had definitely, they were just a bunch of stereotypes in my head. So I got over that pretty fast because I read their writing. I had to assign them essays, and they wrote about their children a lot. They wrote about, I said, you need to write an essay about a memorable day. And some of them wrote about the first day of prison, which was incredibly harrowing. I would love to read more of their writing about what prison life is like. But most of them wrote about their kids, and they had functional relationships with their children. They saw them regularly, and they had an intense amount of love, and they're just trying so hard to get back to them. So I wanted to write a story about a positive relationship between a child and an incarcerated parent. He's not perfect, but he's also not evil. And a lot of times, I don't know if you ever watched The Flash or anything like that, but in The Flash, the situation there is Barry's dad was wrongfully accused.
Right.
And so Barry's job is to get him out of prison, right? You got to free the innocent, perfect father. And then there's that character whose name I can't remember, who is not a sidekick, but his father is the toy maker serial killer.
Or Cisco, is that right?
Yeah, something like Cisco, I think, somebody like that. No, wait, I'm thinking of Supergirl. Anyway, one of those shows. And his whole thing is trying to separate himself from a father who is a serial killer in prison and is so evil. He just doesn't want anything to do with them. But most kids of incarcerated parents, they don't have these two extremes. They have a real parent with some flaws and some great characteristics, and they have a relationship with them. And so that's kind of the story I wanted to tell, and that's why I have that character. He's kind of a character in the book, even though he never appears on the island.
Yeah.
But he's always in her head. And their memories together are always there. So that's why I wanted to do that.
Well, just as a side question, since you brought up Supergirl and The Flash, are you still watching them? Did you see the latest crossover?
No, I actually haven't watched Supergirl and The Flash in, I don't know, maybe a year. I don't know what it is. I haven't gone back to them. And no, so I'm not up to date.
I kind of gave up on The Flash, and Ben and I think Rick and I talked about how we only watch the crossover episodes that they do once a year.
And I'll be honest, I'm not going to watch any more of those either. That last one was nope.
Yeah, except there was one really great thing about it, right, Ben?
That it made me upset that instead of getting Brandon Routh as Superman, we get the other guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't great. That was terrible.
I was going to say Brandon Routh. I loved seeing him suit up again. I think he's a great Superman.
Yeah, for all like 6 minutes of it.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Now we get nerd Superman and Lois. I'm not, like you said, we both love Superman, and I don't intend to watch that show at all. If Brandon Routh isn't going to be the Superman and Lois, then I'm not interested. So.
But I did appreciate John Wesley Shipp's character as the dad in prison.
Yes.
That storyline was great until they randomly killed him off in season 2. And yeah, well, the less we talk about Flash, the better, I think.
Probably. Yeah. So, why scuba diving and the ocean? What fascinates you about the ocean? And well, let's start with scuba diving. How long have you been doing that?
I actually took a course when I was 13 or something like that. My parents bid on a scuba diving package for me on the, those PBS, they do those pledge drive thing where people donate for their businesses.
Yeah.
And then, so they bid on one of those and got it. And I got certified. And then it's a super expensive sport. And nobody I knew did it. So once I was certified, I kept wanting to go and I never went. So as an adult, I went back and I kept waiting to find people, friends who wanted to do it. And I never could. And finally I was like, I'm done with this. I'm just going to go do it. And I got certified about 10, 11 years ago. And I decided what I was going to do is just every time I wanted to go scuba diving, I would call a dive shop and say, hey, can I come out with, next time you go with a group, will you pair me up with somebody? I'm a single. And that's what I've done. I've never actually had a friend who went diving with me. And I go about maybe twice a year. I'm not a super awesome diver. Sia, the character in the book, is an amazing diver. It's a bit of a fantasy, that she just knows everything about the equipment and she can find her way in the dark. And she's an excellent navigator.
She's been doing it all of her life. So
yeah, she's done tons of it. And so whereas I'm a little bit awkward, by the time that I get to scuba diving again, I've kind of forgotten how to attach the hose to the tank, and I try to not show the other divers that I'm fumbling it.
Well,
but I've been diving some gorgeous places.
I've done it too, and you're right. It's a super expensive sport to keep up. But that feeling.
Where did you go?
Florida, at Vero Beach. So that was years ago, though. When
come back down to Florida, I'll take you some nice places.
Okay, all right. I'd have to get recertified, but I just remember that feeling. It's such a wonderful feeling to be down there exploring, and gravity doesn't have quite the hold on you that it does on land. And yeah, it's great.
Careful. Pete said he'd take you there. He didn't say he'd bring you back.
Right. He wants to take me scuba diving and leave me under without a tank. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you ever see Open Water?
Open Water? I don't think
it was the two scuba divers. It was based on a true story. The two scuba divers that go on a scuba diving trip, and the charter accidentally leaves them out in the ocean.
Yeah.
And there's sharks.
Yeah. They miscounted when the divers came up. That is a truly terrifying story.
Yeah. But that's the thing about the ocean, isn't it? It gives you this feeling of awe and wonder, but existential terror at the same time as well.
Well, and there is something about. So you were asking why diving. There's something about getting in the water, and it reminds me of how vulnerable I am. But I'm also so excited to be there because I know what I'm going to see. I know what I'm going to experience. That my excitement overcomes the fear of being small. I think it really does make you feel small when you're just dangling over this, especially if there's a lot of deep water underneath you.
Oh yeah.
That's a freaky feeling. I went diving in Grand Cayman, and once they have, Grand Cayman has these super steep cliffs, underwater cliffs. So there's a drop off. It goes down immediately to 400 feet. So you kind of go out a little bit and look down, and it's like hovering. It's like you just stepped off of a skyscraper,
right?
But you don't fall.
I remember that feeling.
Strange feeling. And you also you can just immediately think, what's coming up from the depths that I cannot see? But then you see a pretty fish and some faint, like a coral. I'm like, oh, it's pretty. I'm going to get distracted by the beautiful things and don't realize, how vulnerable you really are.
But as you point out in the book, Sia is writing to her father. In one section, she says, people are afraid a shark's going to get them, but the odds are extremely small. Things like sharks, things like that, where they have a death machine parked in their driveway. Far more people die of car accidents and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then she goes, then she calls them morons or something to that effect.
To enjoy your shark porn, because there's a shark circling the boat at that time.
Yeah.
They just can't stop looking at it because they think it's this danger machine. And she's, yeah. And the other thing I think she says, you got that, like the death machine parked in the driveway and a loaded gun under a pile of sweaters in the closet. And that was actually growing up. For some reason, I don't know why my dad didn't lock. He had a weapon. He had a .22. And he would keep it under a pile of sweaters loaded in the closet, completely just within reach. And as growing up, because I knew no better, I never really thought about it. It wasn't until an adult and I realized how many people do that. They actually keep something that dangerous just within reach. And yet the big bad shark is the thing we're afraid of. The ocean is probably not what's going to get you.
No.
That isn't a happy message that there's something else. But
well, something's always going to get you.
Yeah.
What's the kid's name who says to Sia that something to the effect of, I don't have that page right in front of me, but most people forget the fact that they're going to die. They don't ever think about it. He works. His parents are undertakers, I believe.
Yeah. Ben,
yes. Yeah.
He says, nobody thinks about like who's going to put the last outfit you're ever going to wear on you. And I know that's a morbid thought, but I think that, and that's part of what the book is about, is we have a fear of a really natural thing, the end of life, and it's understandable, but it is natural. And there are people who help us with that. Like I have a relative right now who's going through hospice, and they have such a wonderful attitude towards death. So does Ben. He has a very positive attitude that this is something that comes to us. And, you want somebody who understands it with you kind of near the end. And so that character and his background as his parents owning this funeral home really appealed to me. And especially because the main character is a little bit afraid of it. She has not come to terms with the end of things.
I think one of the most beautiful ways for me anyway to come to terms with it is that death is the mother of beauty. One of these days you're going to die, so you need to enjoy each day. You need to remember the fact that you're going to die, not so it depresses you, but so that you get the most that you can out of life. I also want to point out that
Mike,
sorry?
You also need to remember that the clothes that you're wearing when you die are what you're stuck with in the afterlife.
That's right.
Uh-oh.
In the afterlife. And
always wear clean underwear.
And if you're in the afterlife and Beetlejuice, then you've really got some problems.
Oh yeah. And I remember because I just watched the video you sent me right before this on why I should finish Angel.
Right.
And one of the lines at the end was just the narrator borrowed this from something else, of course, but something isn't beautiful because it lasts.
Yes.
It's a great line.
Exactly. A thing isn't beautiful because it lasts.
There you go.
And sometimes just that he says right is right. You do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, not because you're looking for an award or a reward. I also want to point out that in several places in the book, you seem to be comparing the ocean to space. And I think that's a really apt comparison. Here's a line that I wanted to read. I wrote down page numbers on a couple of these. By the way, you're a wonderful writer. So
thank you.
It's not just the story, but it's the style as well. The darkness thickened until I imagined she's underwater. The darkness thickened until I imagined it was like hovering in space, in some corner of the universe where all the stars have gone out. So, I really love that.
Thanks.
So, also, let's see, I've written down a couple of other page numbers that I wanted to. Oh, this one I just wrote down because I liked this one line on page 20 of at least my copy. I've got an arc. I screamed a cloud of bubbles. And then one more I've got here. If I'm reading a Kindle book, then I highlight and then I can put them all into one spot. But if I'm reading a print book, I have to write down the page numbers so that I can get to them. Oh yes, that page 62 is where we're talking about the death traps in the driveway.
Mm-hmm. And
then the last one I have here, there's more, but I'll stop here. You know, I feel like I'm learning things all the time. I never want to stop learning. I'm almost 50, and I always want to. Each week, I know more than I knew before, or I maybe gain a little bit of wisdom that I didn't know before. So with that in mind, maybe this is incredibly ignorant of me, but I did not know she makes, in the story, she makes fresh water from salt water. I didn't even know that was even possible.
I didn't know it was possible until I researched it.
Okay.
So basically, I put her on an island without any water. I said, okay. So I had to decide: am I going to find a spring or not? Am I going to create a spring on the island? And so I just did some research, and yeah, you can create. It's this weird little. I want to try it in my backyard.
Well, tell us how.
Pardon?
Tell us how. How does it work?
Yeah. So you basically take a container like you could do it with like a bowl, and you put a smaller bowl inside of it full of seawater, and then over it you place some kind of tarp, or it needs to have a kind of a peak to it. So then you put it in the sun, and you let the heat evaporate, and the fresh water will roll down the sides into the outer bowl, while the seawater stays inside the center. So what she does is she gets a mask that's actually this poor guy in the beginning who she leads into a shipwreck and doesn't come back out, his very expensive $500 mask, and she creates the top of her freshwater converter and then has underneath it like a second mask and the little cup in there, and she's basically making it evaporate, or puts it in the sun on the beach to evaporate to make fresh water. And I actually, the only thing I don't know is how many of these you would need in order to keep 4 people alive. I don't know how long it would take.
Well, it begs the question for me is, how can you mass produce this?
Well, and that's one of the things that happens is, it's so interesting when you're writing something like this. I'm like, okay, so they need stuff. All right, well, there's garbage washing up on the beach. And I'm a bit of an environmentalist, and I always feel about the trash on the beach, and the number of times I've gone on vacation, and my daughter and we start picking it up, throwing it away. But in this case, they find all this trash and they use that.
Right.
And I love characters who can take trash or junk and turn it into something amazing. Or take something that's broken and repurpose it. And I think that works thematically too, because her family's a kind of a broken mess in a lot of ways. But it doesn't mean that it's not good. It doesn't mean that it's not going to work, because you just have to make it, you just have to be creative to make it functional again.
Speaking of her family being a broken mess, is there a particular reason why you sent her father to prison? I'm not criticizing. I'm honestly curious what made you decide to do that.
Well, there's that personal experience that I had dealing, talking to prisoners and while I was teaching them, that made me really interested in the life of somebody who's behind bars.
And she does share some of her thoughts with her father about what he must be going through at times too.
So I also I don't know. I think that there's an essential question of how we are. I don't know if it's really part of the book as much as it could be, but just how we are often punished and redeemed in various ways. And Sia feels almost like her childhood, which has been, it was taken away from her in some ways. So she had to be thrust into adulthood a little bit faster than she wanted to be, a lot faster actually. And she felt like it, that something's wrong with her now because she didn't end up like all the other kids at school. And I think it has to, like, the kind of, she has a lot of forgiving to do. So there's the forgiving she has to do for him because he made a mistake. And it was really, he did the crime. And it was manslaughter, but it was a complete accident.
Right.
But it was still done. He did it. He was negligent and he lost control. So I think that her forgiving herself for all of her perceived sins, whatever they are, her transgressions, and for not being the person that she really wants to be. And then of course she has to forgive him as well for what he did that caused him. I don't know if, of course she doesn't like the fact that he has gone away and she can't see him but once a week. But deep down, she's also angry at him for making this decision, that split-second decision that separated them.
Yeah, and that part really, really resonated with me because of my background. She's talking about her lack of social skills at the age of 17. I won't bore you with the details, but I didn't go to public school. It wasn't a fun childhood. And I remember once I got out of there, I had to really, I'm just glad I was smart enough to realize that I was dumb. When it came to social skills and everything, I had a lot to learn at the time. And, Sia's starting to realize that as well, if I'm reading her character correctly. And I'm a 49-year-old male and she's a 17-year-old female, and again, that's well written to be able to find characteristics in a protagonist that you identify with, even though in many ways they're far different from you.
Oh, thank you. And I think my experience moving from England to Mississippi, the kind of feeling that you had not understanding the social schools, I had a huge problem with that. Moving from that, I went into school in the United States and I hadn't watched American television, and I didn't realize, and you just don't realize how much pop culture, how much it just bleeds into conversations, and how many times I would say, "Wait, what? Who's that?" I remember I have a distinct memory of asking it, like somebody had a character on their sock. I said, "Who's that?" And they wouldn't tell me, but they just went to go get other kids and say it again, because they could not believe that I didn't know who it was.
No, I'm right there with you. Even I've been married for 25 years, so I even remember when we were dating. I met Danielle when we were both 23, and she mentioned something about a prom, and I said, "What's a prom?" I didn't know so many basic things. So, in your character, Sia, she's going through that as well. My wife, speaking of my wife, she's a high school teacher, English teacher. And I told her today, I said, you really ought to have she's always looking for books that will hook her kids, because a lot of the kids that she teaches, they're retaking an English class. They're at the lower level of the poverty spectrum, and many of them do actually have parents who are in jail for one reason or another. And I said, you really ought to read this. Your kids really might be interested in this book. So she said she would. So maybe she'll be teaching it next year when and when life resembles normal again.
That's awesome. I was just thinking that. So, one of the things, the character of Steph, that she's not a very likable character. So the that's one of the other there are 4 survivors, and one of them is the Ben's ex-girlfriend. Of course, she's interested in Ben. So there's my little YA thing going on there.
She's kind of a bitch.
She's pretty rough. She was so much worse in the original draft, and
really?
I had beta readers reading and said, she's unbelievably bad.
Yeah.
And one of the things, so I softened her and I made her more human. But one of the things that Sia struggles with is girl language. And for me, that was something, especially going to the South. There's a lot of, I still am very direct. And coming from England, and I didn't understand there was all this subtlety, that people not saying what they really thought and implying it with lilt or, pauses and things like that. And that's one of the things that Sia has problems with. And is Steph is socially very intelligent, and she rules the school when she's not on a deserted island. And Sia feels like, this is her worst nightmare, to be with this queen bee stuck on an island. And I think that's me channeling a little bit of myself.
Yeah, I had to learn that too.
That would be rough.
I remember early in our marriage, I would, here's just a dumb example. I would go take a shower. While I'm in the shower, Danielle would come in. She goes, "Why are you taking a shower?" And I was like, what are you talking about? Because I feel grungy. I need to take a shower. But what she meant was, are you going somewhere? It took me a while to realize things like that.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't really asking why am I showering. She's asking if I have plans for the day. So there's a really interesting, I read another interview when you were learning to deep dive, I think you're geographically the closest person I've interviewed so far, because I'm about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour southeast of Dallas, and you're in Fort Worth. So still quite a drive, but it's all the same metroplex area. But anyway, so you're learning to deep dive in Texas. Can you tell us how that happened? Because it's pretty interesting, because the lakes aren't that deep in Texas.
Yeah, and I mean, if I were made of money, I would have done what people do, the rich people do, and they go off and do their deep training in the Caribbean.
Right, yeah.
That, for me, going to the Caribbean is quite a treat, because it's pretty far away. So I wanted to go diving on the Spiegel Grove, which is a ship right off the coast of Key Largo. It's a beautiful Navy destroyer that's been scuttled to make an artificial reef, and it's deep. But the charters won't take you out there unless you have advanced certification, because there's a current. So once you swim out to the rope and you start to descend, if you get caught in that current and you don't know that you freak out, or you let go of the rope and the current just like whoosh, then you don't know what to do. So they want to make sure that you know what you're doing. So I had to go on get advanced certification, and I went to this lake called Clearwater Springs Scuba Ranch. It is not clear. I don't know why. I think maybe it's a tongue-in-cheek name.
The most ironic name ever, yeah.
It's a mud puddle. It's it's actually a great place to dive, because they've actually they sunk some old cars, and that's the one that I think they have a plane, like an old Cessna down there.
Really?
So they made a little, so you could have little moments of interest, and you could see some little gray fish and some gray rocks, and everything sort of brown or gray. But one of the things we had to do was we had to do navigation, which is wonderful to do in a muddy lake, because it's very challenging. So you really get a good lesson. And then we had to go down to 60 feet. That's considered a deep dive. And lakes in Texas just aren't deep. They're just, in general, they're not that deep. So the owners of the park dug out a hole in the lake down to 60 feet. And they put an old, it looks like a missile silo catwalk down in it. And they call it the silo. And before we even went down there, I'd heard the firefighters train, the ones who dive, they train in it. And a lot of them hate it. That even the firefighters don't want to go into this thing. So anyway, we're going to go down there. And once we got down to about 40 feet, the silt above us blocked out all light. So now I'm in the space.
Right.
where all the lights have gone out. And this dive really did inspire me quite a bit in the writing of this book. And we descend even deeper. I can still see the people around me, my dive master and the other students. We get down all the way past this catwalk, which is just creepy. So this little missile, we go down lower. And in order to get our certification, we really have to hit that 60-foot mark. So he told us, you're going to have to take your depth gauge and sort of shove it down into the mud a little bit in order to, ding it as it's 60 feet.
Right.
Well, as soon as you do that, then there's silt. And at that point, I can't see anything. I've got a dive light. I'm shining it on my instrument on my wrist. 3 inches away, I can't read my watch, my dive watch. I shine it on my air gauge. I don't know how much air I have because it's just silt. It's like what a lot of people probably experience when they do technical diving or commercial diving. But luckily, there was nothing. I wasn't dealing with a current or anything getting lost. But for a good 5-10 minutes, I was completely alone in a way that I don't know if I've ever been before.
Right.
And the only times I knew that there were other people was when I got hit in the head with somebody's fin, or this other student who just was grabbing my arm with this death grip. And I loved this student. I was grabbing her arm back, or him, or whoever it was. And we were supposed to be doing some skills down there, looking at some color charts, and we just never got to that, obviously. And finally, it was just so disorienting that the fear that something like that engenders, it's really deep and basic, sort of like an animal reaction.
Yeah.
That's your body knows, like, this is not natural, and you need to get out of here. And luckily, when I'm scared, I kind of play possum. I just get very still. Whereas some of the students, not that day, but there have been other days that the instructor had to keep students from bolting for the surface out of just terror. And that's very dangerous. You should not swim quickly. You could bust a lung.
The only way you even, in a situation that you even know which way is up, is you feel that pull of gravity. And in water, water sometimes it's hard to feel.
Yeah, and I've never actually been shipped inside of a ship diving. But what I understand happens is that silty environment happens when people keep their fins too close to the ground. They can't see, and then they kind of forget which way is up, and they definitely forget which way is out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you end up, that's why ship diving requires so much training. And what Sia does when she goes down into the sinkhole that's in the middle of the island is so incredibly dangerous, because it's really easy to get lost.
The best way that you have to follow your bubbles.
That's true.
The bubbles go up, except if you go through a thermocline,
mm-hmm.
which is where there's different temperatures of water, a silt layer will build up, and sometimes that silt layer is a couple feet thick. And your bubbles will actually accumulate underneath it, and they won't move. They're just trapped underneath this layer of sediment that's floating in the water.
Where have you been diving? Sounds like you're pretty experienced.
I started when I was 16, and in Pennsylvania, we deep dive in quarries, and I've done a couple lake dives, and we have some holes in Florida that go down 100 feet. And then off the coast in Palm Beach.
Yeah, I know there's some really beautiful springs, like out in Florida.
Yeah.
Where the manatees live.
Yeah, the Crystal Springs is nice. There's so many manatee deaths now. They've really tried to cut back on people interacting with the manatees completely. You can still do it. It's just frowned on. But yeah, manatees.
Sorry.
You can do a lot of. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Pete. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Leslie, I really, really enjoyed this book. Anybody listening, if you haven't read it yet, really should pick it up. if you got teenagers, you should pick up a copy for them too, because it really does hook you from the start. The book really does hook you from the start. Guys, anybody else have questions for Leslie?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yes.
I see it's going to come out on Audible next month. Do you know who the narrator is going to be?
I'm not entirely positive. I've made a request because they sent me, with everything happening with COVID, there weren't as many choices, and the choices they sent me were great. And I had forgotten her name, but I listened to it and she was pretty amazing. But she's done other Blink books from HarperCollins. She did Every Stolen Breath, and she has a gorgeous voice. She's also a singer, but I can't remember her. She looks like 20. She's so young.
Yeah, I was going to ask why the delay for the audio edition, but yeah, in light of coronavirus and everything, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it was. Originally, the idea was it was going to come out May 5th with the book.
Yeah, so it usually happens.
It just, I think that Blink and HarperCollins have done a really great job of pivoting and trying to handle this. But a lot of these people, they're living in New York. I mean, think about that. Like my agent, who lives in Queens, she was telling me. So I think she's been out of since March. She's been out of her apartment 3 times.
Yeah.
Is that Chloe Delandis?
Yes, thank you. Chloe Delandis is the name of I'm hoping, but it's not really. I mean, I know it's supposed to be out next month, and I'm not actually entirely sure who's reading it, but apparently it's not safe to go to the recording studio, and so that's. I don't think the recording has started.
Well, your publisher is doing a great job for you. So yeah, I'm sure whoever they have is going to do a great job.
Yeah, I mean, and she did a really good job in some of their other titles. And no, I mean, I didn't know what to expect when I ended up with a publisher like HarperCollins, such a big machine, and every one of those, the big 5, have a different culture. And I've heard a lot of great things about HarperCollins, the other imprints, and I'm experiencing that as well. And they also hire outside help from publicity places like K Publicity. They're fabulous people. Just oh my gosh, you email them, they email back within an hour. They're always on the lookout for opportunities.
I believe that's how I was introduced to you, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Angela, is that right?
Angela, wonderful
right.
Angela, if you're listening.
Yes.
Finds all these wonderful things for me. But they have done a great job, especially considering what everybody's going through, and that it should take a backseat to what's happening in the world, that we're all trying to take care of the people we love. We're trying to stay safe. So I try not to ask questions unless it's very important, because I know they're all just scrambling to make everything work.
As much as you can tell from a single email, Angela seems like a very nice, empathic person. If you remember, we had to reschedule. All of us here, we lost a good friend of ours, Joe Pulver, a writer. And
I'm so sorry. I've been hearing about that, and I'm so sorry.
But she was so empathic when I said, some people would have been like, oh, that's not professional, they have to reschedule, and I try not to do that, but yeah, she was very kind about it. So, and so were you, actually. So, Matt, you had a question.
Yeah, okay, so what's next for you?
Oh, so what's next is, there are 2 books that I'm working on. One is completed, and we are looking. So it's a ghost story that I'm doing a little bit of revision on. And this is definitely one of those books I didn't let go of. That I still believe it can be a great book, but I had to rewrite a ton of it. And it's a ghost story, and it's also about sleep. So the main character is living in Savannah and has been haunted by a ghost who's kind of a parasite for the last year of her life. And I'm fascinated by that idea, because I love haunted house stories. But when you got a haunted house, you just go check into a motel and you're fine. So
Yeah.
But what if the ghost won't leave you? What if it's with you? And I wanted to play around with that idea.
I like that idea. That's one of the things that I haven't seen the others because I heard they weren't any good, but that was one of the things that fascinated me most about the movie Paranormal Activity, is that whatever this thing is, it's not haunting the house. It's haunting the wife. You know.
Yeah, it's terrifying, and so it specifically has a kind of a window of opportunity in that moment of between sleep and waking, which I call it's the borderlands of sleep. And so that's right now the working title is Borderlands. And she also is, because I can't get away from ships, I don't know why, she is working on an archaeological dig with her dad, who's an archaeologist in Savannah Back River, which is a hostile area full of alligators. But she's also dragged in a lot of different directions with a beauty pageant, which I'm not sure, I might actually lose that thread. And the other book I'm working on is taking place in a town I created in South Texas called Gypsum. And it's a really small town in dark sky country where, you know, that it's one of those on those international registers of dark sky places where you can really see the Milky Way. Something I love to do is going out there and camping and looking at the sky.
God, yeah.
And it's about a haunted.
I'm sorry. Where is that in Texas? That real place.
So the real place it's near is Marfa, Texas. So in Marfa, Big Bend area in the Chihuahuan Desert, not that far from the border of Mexico. Now I created
West Texas, yeah.
Yeah, so I created a fictional town called Gypsum, and in this, so I'm still writing it, but basically there's a haunted safe. And I don't know why I'm so stuck on the idea of this haunted safe and what's inside, but that the safe itself has a presence, and the characters who get a hold of it, well, once it opens, Gypsum is going to be in a lot of trouble. And actually don't know entirely what's going to happen because I'm not really I don't plot out stories. I would love to be able to outline. Oh God, that would be so great to know where I was going. But when I've tried to do that, I end up with really poor results. So I try instead to focus the story in other ways. But so I know there's a haunted safe, and I know there's something bad in it. No spoilers on what's in it. I don't know what's going to happen yet.
It almost sounds like you're doing a variation on the old haunted crypt idea.
Once you open it up. Yeah.
There's something buried in a crypt.
Mm-hmm.
It's Pandora's safe.
Yeah, it's a Pandora kind of thing. But the question, and so I'm also really fascinated with haunted objects and how something can have an energy. So we'll see what I'm going to do with it. I don't know, but
well, a couple things. First of all, I'm very. I've been wanting to actually go out to West Texas. I haven't been there in 30 years. I love being in places where I can see, where I'm away from light pollution. You know, astronomy is kind of a hobby. In an alternate life, I might have been an astronomer because I'm just so fascinated with space and all of that stuff. The other thing, I'll be really interested to read your Borderlands book when it comes out. Again, Paranormal Activity, one of the creepiest moments in that movie is when you're watching the recording of, I think it's the wife in the middle of the night, just standing there, staring, watching the husband sleep without moving just for hours. There's something so terrifying about that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just not natural. Any other questions for Leslie, guys? Bridget?
Yeah. Oh, go
ahead, Bridget.
Go ahead, Bridget. You go first.
Sure. Yeah, you're on your Goodreads profile. You mentioned that you're a B-movie horror fan. I was just curious what some of your favorites are, or some that may have influenced you the most.
You know, it's funny. One of the ones that, and it's not a good movie, but it's one of the dealing with influence first. I think about that. There's a movie called Prophecy from the 1970s with this big mutant bear thing. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Yes, it's Poison Bears.
Yeah. So
wait. It is a good movie. What are you talking about?
You like that one? There's a lot of, we got campers, we have the woods, we have this mutant bear thing. And I saw that as a kid, and it made a huge impression on me, partly because I could see the woods outside of my bedroom window, and I was just terrified the thing was going to come through. So I think I've really been attracted to stories that are set in wild places, and that was just one of many movies that sort of underline that for me. Another one that I'm not going to call Jaws a B movie because that's just a really good movie. So that's definitely one of my favorites. But as a beast movie, that's fantastic. And I really there was a recent one, and it's not something where you're going to be. Doesn't answer any really huge questions about the universe or yourself. But Crawl is the one that came out a couple of years ago. I enjoyed that one a lot.
That's the alligators in the hurricane, right?
I was about to say, I'm absolutely positive that Pete Rollick has seen this. So,
I had a good time, and a movie doesn't have to be important for me to like it. So that one was great. Leviathan, that's creepy.
Great movie.
That's definitely creepy. If I go away from B movies into beast movies, though, I would say my number one beast movie would Jaws, and then after that would be Alien. Fantastic.
Did you see Underwater?
Yeah, I did actually. That one was, I really liked it, and a lot of people did not. I think they found the main character, whatever. Who's the actress who plays that? Twilight.
Kristen Stewart.
Yeah, they just hate her because she was on Twilight.
Yeah, she's fine. She's fine in it. It's a very subdued performance. But there are a lot of scenes in Underwater. Like who said they saw it? Okay.
I think most of us have seen it.
Okay, what did you think of the underwater, the claustrophobic feeling of those underwater scenes in the darkness?
That was very well done. It was an enjoyable movie. We showed it on eZine movie night. Everybody liked it. I thought it was well shot, well acted, great characters.
Yeah, the claustrophobia of that in the ocean. Again, comparing that to space. Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey and I forget who else. But at one point they're talking about on the other side of this thin metal wall is millions of miles of space that wants to kill you. There's no oxygen, anything like that. So yeah.
I really liked about that movie how it started immediately in the action. There wasn't we're drilling and we're a happy crew, and then, oh no, catastrophe. Like, it was immediately into a life or death situation. I thought that was really cool.
For me, there's that part toward the end of Alien where Sigourney Weaver has activated or deactivated the cooling unit, and she has to run and then run back and then run again. That section of that film has just been expanded out for Underwater. It's forgetting the preface. It is now a mad dash from where you were safe to a life pod.
Mm-hmm. I never thought about that.
There are a lot of comparisons between Underwater and Alien as a sort of corporate industrial horror / sci-fi films. And you look at the underwater diving suits, they're very reminiscent of what was used in Alien for spacesuits.
Well, a couple of things. If you like stories set in wild, I think you said antagonistic wild places, something to that effect. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Have you read any Laird Barron?
I haven't.
Yeah, you should.
I should.
Yeah. And then I had read that you like creature features, and I actually found this article published a couple of weeks ago on Bloody Disgusting. The headline is Dark Fairy Tale The Wretched merges Rear Window with a unique creature feature. And I won't read the whole article, or actually It's the creature that's the biggest draw in this fun horror movie, and the witch is worth the price of admission alone. Teenager Ben, speaking of a Ben teenager, is still adapting to his parents' recent split, making a summer visit with his dad in a small coastal town a bit strained and awkward. It doesn't help that the popular kids are unwelcoming or that dad is already back in the dating game, but then Ben notices something really strange happening next door. Something evil has taken over the skin of a woman, and it's preying on local children. Too bad no one believes Ben, who'll have to square off against this evil alone. It says it's available in video on demand. I haven't looked it up yet, but Pete, doesn't this sound pretty good, actually?
Yeah, I like that they acknowledge that they're being inspired by Rear Window.
What movie?
It's called The Wretched.
They're actually being inspired by Fright Night, if you think about it.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was inspired by Rear Window.
Right.
So, Leslie, did I just see you write down the title so that you can watch the movie?
No, my phone is buzzing, and I think my friends are watching this show and texting me.
Oh.
And I just looked. I was like, "Oh, that's what that is. That's cool." It's really nice. I have really great friends.
Well, friends.
My writer friends are pretty awesome.
Thank you for watching, friends. So,
yeah.
And we'll probably get some watching the archived version as well, I'm sure. So,
yeah.
Pete, yeah, what were you going to say something?
Well, no, it's just like some of my favorite movies have been inspired by Rear Window, and very few of them actually acknowledge them. Like Fright Night.
Alligator People.
No, not the Alligator People.
Oh my god.
The Jamie Lee Curtis, Stacy Keach movie set in the outback of Australia, where Stacy Keach plays a trucker and Jamie Lee Curtis is a hitchhiker, and they realize that
she was in the fog and she's still hitchhiking.
Yes, she's still hitchhiking. Anyway, they see a guy bury a cooler in the middle of the outback, and they just realize that the only reason that he's been burying coolers is because he's a serial killer.
Ooh.
And they spend the next two hours of the movie chasing him or being chased by him.
That could be the only reason. Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of films inspired by, what is it, Disturbia with Shia LaBeouf. But yeah,
that was a pretty good movie.
Yeah,
was it? I kind of made a point never to watch a movie with him in it. Should I change that?
It's worth watching. It's not bad.
Okay.
I mean, Body Double clearly is a direct nod to Rear Window.
I just keep waiting for you to look for any excuse to throw
Big Ass Spider.
Yeah.
She likes creature features.
Oh God. Oh, I created that opening.
Well, you could go. You could see a scuba diver climbing up the skyscraper to try and save people from the spider. I mean, it would fit right in.
I think you need an intervention. That's what I think.
There's actually a really good book by a self-published horror writer from Australia called 8 Terror Has a New Species. It's got a pulpy filter of these, basically a bunch of people in the Amazon and giant spiders the size
Sounds
of...
like a classic, like War and Peace.
I had so much fun with this book. And I mean, at one point, a spider eats a helicopter. So that was definitely a favorite moment.
Okay, Leslie.
Oh, did you watch Big Ass Spider?
I got to interrupt before Henry goes.
There's Henry.
Yes, I didn't think he would cooperate, and he's still not cooperating. I'm sorry, Henry.
I'm just telling you, if you like spiders and helicopters, you'll like Big Ass Spider.
Oh, okay.
Can we agree that that'll be the last time you ever mention it on the show?
No, sorry.
Oh.
So, I don't know how we got here, but
do we ever know how we?
Mega Piranha.
Oh, I haven't seen that one. Well, I've seen the new Piranha, which was really revolting.
Yes, you're right. But Mega Piranha is about giant piranha that swim from the Amazon across the ocean to Florida, eating the planes and helicopters on the way.
But how is a mega piranha really different in its behavior from a shark, from like movie shark?
Yeah. It's just
like I think they're scarier when they're small.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can't finish off the creature feature conversation without telling everyone, especially you, Leslie, that 2 days ago, again on Bloody Disgusting, here's the headline: 10 fun creature features you maybe haven't seen. The Deadly, I'm sure Pete's seen all of these, but for normal people, the Deadly Spawn, Curse 2, the Bite, Ticks, Strange Invaders. Man, the creature looks really cool in Strange Invaders. And in Scarecrows. Have you seen Scarecrows, Pete?
I have seen Scarecrows.
See, Leslie, what did I tell you? Scarecrows. That is one creepy looking dude. The Outing, Blue. There's a movie called Blue Monkey.
Yes, Blue Monkey. Yes.
Shakma.
You don't watch Shakma.
Okay. The Kindred, of course.
Yeah.
Alligator, I think we've already mentioned. That's the last one.
That's different than Alligator People, but yeah, Alligator.
Alligator is a very old movie.
Yeah.
A giant alligator in the sewer.
The two that look interesting to me are Strange Invaders and Scarecrows.
Mike, you know what you remind me of? You remind me of the grandfather in the Lost Boys. And he's like, they get there and the kids are like looking around, they can't find the TV, and he's like, give them the ground rules. And he's like, when the mail comes and when the TV guide comes, you'll be tempted to rip off the label. Don't do it. You'll just end up taking on the cover. And he's just like, you have a TV? He says, no. You have the TV guide. You don't need a TV.
Well, I never.
You know what, Mike? It's all about your silver hair. That's why you remind him of the grandfather in the
No, it's just like you don't watch any of these movies. You just read about them on Bloody Disgusting.
I'm just very picky because I read a lot of books. If I watch a movie, it's got to be worth taking my time away from reading. So, and yes, I never tire of being compared to old people, Pete. So thank you. Appreciate that.
When I was growing up, I used to read the movie reviews and not see the movies.
So while we're on this subject, can I just say that the person that reviews concerts for your local paper is the most worthless person in the world?
My local paper?
Yeah.
That rag? There's not one word in there that's...
But think about it.
So you hate Siskel and Ebert, right?
Well, no.
This is Corsicana.
You're talking about musical concerts then instead of movies?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the deal. I went to a concert last night. I thought it was really good. You guys can't go. I mean, what good is a concert review?
Who was the reviewer on that?
Pete, you're missing the point of a local paper anyway. It's not to like be national news. It's to like report about features and people around the town.
I'm just saying it's got to be the most worthless job.
Matt, I wish it did that. It's very. Let me put it to you this way: Danielle's cousin moved here, and he from Illinois. He almost immediately got a, I'm assuming, non-paying job writing a column for the Corsicana paper. I'm sorry if any Corsicana people are watching. I'm so sorry, but it is a rag. You're right, Pete. So, yeah, okay. So we covered the creature feature thing. I think I was going to ask you.
I have a question, Mike.
Yeah, Rich. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, Leslie. All right. So, let's talk about YA. I know it's a marketing category.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at, say, Leigh Bardugo, who has just jumped in to the adult horror field with her most recent book, Ninth House. R.L. Stine has written a more adult horror novel, aside from YA. And when I read, say, because you and I have both lived in England, there's a novelist over there called Darren Shan, and he wrote a series of vampire novels that was made into a movie here called Vampire's Assistant. I think it was called Cirque du Freak or something over there.
Yep. No, it's Cirque du Freak here.
When you read Darren Shan's books, they are brutal. brutal, right? So my question to you is, what is it that separates YA from adult? And so when I read Stephen King's it's not just about the protagonists being young adults. It's got to be something more.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if it's the use of language or not use of certain types of language. And the second half of that question is, do you think, you will jump into an adult kind of horror milieu?
So the thing about young adult, and especially this type of book that I wrote, which is 13 and up, is a crossover book. So in that area of YA, 70% of the readership is actually above the age of 18, which is interesting. It's intended for teens, but it's not who's reading it as much, although it's definitely appropriate for teens. But in order for something to be YA, and what are the things that push it into the adult world? And like you mentioned, and that's such a great book with young adults as the stars for most of it. And you can actually, I've seen some young adult get pretty gory. So there's a young adult writer, Danielle Vega, Survive the Night. I've read it. Yeah, that's brutal. Some brutal stuff. It's a great book. Yep. And it's not really language, because it used to be that language would get you kicked out of the young adult, but now it's been trending more and more. Sort of salty language. But sex, I think, is one of the things that you generally don't veer very far into sexual material in a young adult book, and it's they're starting to push that boundary a little bit. But you can mention sex. It happens off screen, and there have been some like mild sex scenes in some young adult, but usually that's the thing that pushes something from young adult into adult. And it's interesting to me. I've thought a lot about this. Our attitudes towards sex and our attitudes towards violence as a culture. That I have relatives who would let their 13-year-old watch The Walking Dead, and they were totally fine with this child seeing a close-up of a zombie eating off a face.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
But if anybody took their shirt off on that show, they would have shut off the TV.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that the ritual of Chud, which would have prevented it from being a YA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yes, totally not.
This is a great question, Rich, because a couple more examples. I don't know, maybe sometimes it just comes down to this is who you're marketing to, because thinking of Boy's Life by Robert McCammon, and Summer of Night by Dan Simmons, and both
Summer of Night's a great example. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, both the protagonists are young boys, 11, 12 years old in both books, but it's not labeled as young adult. So and mm-hmm. I've just read Fractured Tide, and I don't see really there's no sex scenes in Summer of Night that I recall. I don't believe. And
there weren't. No.
Yeah, or in Boy's Life.
That's right. Yeah.
So.
And I've read Ken Dare Blake's Anna Dressed in Blood series. Yeah. Okay, very YA. And Danielle Vega has also written another series about an exorcism. I forget what it's called.
There's a ghost.
It's like a series. It's like a series of like 3 books.
Oh, okay.
Where these high school girls try to exorcise something out of another girl, but it's brutal. So, my question, I'm really curious. Do you, as an author, get any say in that, or does the publisher say your book is going to be in this category or this category?
I definitely wrote specifically for the YA market when I was writing this, and different publishers handle it in different ways. So there are, for example, Blink as a publisher, although this book is a crossover book that can be enjoyed by adults, it's also got Blink has a language rule about no bad language in the books, because it helps with marketing to certain audiences. So even though I've got I've got dead people walking around the island missing an eye or something really gross. Like the monster scene is not super gory, but there's some blood there. You will not find a single. I had a few in there, and I took them out in order.
Did the editors ask you then to take out this language to make it fit into this?
Yeah, and
I was told. Works? Okay.
Yeah, and I knew when we pitched Blink that was part of their thing. That's how they market. For those audiences who are more comfortable with, they don't want the salty language.
Okay.
And so that was kind of an interesting challenge, and I wanted to make something terrifying and adult and not use the F-bomb once.
I just want to say that so Stephen King talks about that I think it's in On Writing, and he talks about how like he tries not to use that language, even though obviously he's writing for adults, because he feels like it's like he's not trying hard enough. It's easy to just throw out an F-bomb to show that a character is upset, but to actually like write them upset. So I wonder, does that give you like an extra sort of creative boost when you try to do something like that?
Yeah, and what I found I had to do is trying to dig into the voice a little bit. And that's another thing, because you're asking like what makes something YA? And a lot of the audiences of YA are expecting a certain voice, especially a lot of first person. Well, there are definitely third person YA, but first person is super popular. And there's a certain voice. They expect a certain level of emotional content to the voice, that you can feel the emotions of that character. A detached narrator in a YA book probably wouldn't do very well, because that goes against.
Is it because teens are hormonal and they're over, like they're just ready to show their feelings when they talk or when they write, like say in a diary, right?
I think that's
versus
a good
an
guess.
adult, right?
I think that's a good explanation. I don't actually know why it is that voice.
In Fractured Tide, actually, there's it reminds me of a couple of things in that story. The first one of the first things is on the island. She says she's writing to her dad, but she says Ben's really hot. That's right, Dad. Your little girl is growing up. Earlier in the book, there's a real slimeball, Captain Phil, I think his name is.
Yeah.
He very, very kind of slimy guy, and he's ogling Sia, and she wishes she had worn her one piece instead of her bikini. He makes her feel very uncomfortable, and then even a little bit later, in front of her mom, I believe he does the same thing to her mom, and he calls Sia girly, and she says, "Don't call me that. Correct me if I'm misremembering anything." And he says, "That's what I call 17-year-old girls." And she says, "What about when I'm 18?" And he smirks and he says, "I call them fair game." Just a real slimeball that I was rooting to die. So, it's alluded to, but not explicit.
Yeah.
I will say, Mike, and Leslie, when I'm in, say, a Barnes and Noble, the YA section is actually quite large, and that's a good thing, I think. If the market is big enough that these kids are reading that, and there's also a section called paranormal romance.
Right.
Okay. Right. So, but that's okay. I will say that it's mostly females I see in that section. And then in the sci-fi section at Barnes & Noble, it's mostly guys. Right. It's an interesting thing to see, but I'm happy to see young people, whether it's sci-fi or YA, paranormal, I'm happy to see them reading.
Absolutely.
But it really is. There's this part of me, though, that I want this kind of taxonomy. I need this kind of structure for how I look at things, and it's hard.
I think this is really just marketing, is what it is. I don't think that
a lot of it is.
It's really just how do you categorize it to sell it. It's not that the category means anything. I don't know. I think I've found it very difficult. Like, there are these books that are like age, 9 to 12. And when my kids were little, we'd read them all the time. They're like books that are about yay big, and they're copiously illustrated, like the Spiderwick series,
Right.
And then the young adult is probably the transition period after that when you're going on to quote adult. And I think they're just trying to market to like those people are getting out of the little kid category and they're trying to coax them into reading, but
sort
it's
of
not,
in between.
I don't think the
stage.
content of the books is that much different than what you'd see in a lot of just plain old books.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hasten to add, for anyone listening to this that's over the age of 18, I just, you know, Fractured Tide might be labeled YA, and I do think, like I said to my wife, that teenagers probably that read this really, really love this book. But as an adult guy that's almost 50 years old, I enjoyed the hell out of it as well. So, you know, if anyone watching or listening to this, you know, if you like sci-fi horror, this is a book you need to read.
Thank you.
So.
Yeah, no, I agree, Mike, and Matt, I think you're right. You know, my issue is that marketers might be limiting the audience by putting it in this category.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, so when you look on Amazon, it explicitly talks about YA. This book being a YA book, right? And
it does.
And Matt, I think you're absolutely right. It's hard to distinguish many times between a YA book and a more adult-oriented book. I'm not sure where YA editors say, if we're going to publish this, our house is going to say this is YA and this is adult, say horror.
Well, I think like Leslie said,
Stephen Chbosky, when he did The Imaginary Friend, I mean, he did Perks of Being a Wallflower. Why was his horror book adult and not YA? I don't know, honestly.
In that particular book, you do have viewpoints of his mother, of the sheriff, and so on. It's not just the kids like in Summer of Night or Boy's Life. And by the way,
but then again, remember, Summer of Night wasn't YA; it was adult.
That's exactly my point, and neither was Boy's Life.
Right.
By the way, for anyone who has not read Boy's Life, should read it. It is absolutely, I think, in the top 10 best books I've ever read. So.
Yeah. So for Leslie, my just I guess my observation is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes being put in these marketing categories can limit your audience. As Mike has pointed out, this is a great book. This is not just for YA. This is very worth reading if you're an adult as well. And to have it, an editor say it's a YA, it could limit. I don't know how much power an author has versus the editors in terms of kind of negotiating that.
But
I don't either. I'm still new to it.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of YA, the perception I have of other readers is that a lot of adult readers are just fine reading YA. They don't give it much thought. And yes, is it marketing? Yes. Can it be limiting? Yes. But at the same time, somebody who's studied marketing for well over half my life, you have to have a starting point.
Sure. Sure.
I would say now of all times that it wouldn't be limiting necessarily. I mean, look at all the people that have read Harry Potter and Divergent series and a number of others that have been incredibly popular, made into movies, etc. Twilight. So I think if there's any time to be a young adult author, now is a great time. That as an adult, if I'm going to go look at something in the young adult fiction, I don't expect it to be patronizing or young sounding. I just know that some of those things, like you said, like, okay, there's not going to be really descriptive sex scenes or a lot of swearing, but sometimes you just want to read that. You just want to enjoy a story without that. So, I think if you're going to be writing young adult, now's a great time to be doing it. So.
And I just thought of another thing that I don't know if it's a requirement or a rule, but I know that when people are giving advice on how to get into the YA market, they always say YA books are paced a little quicker because that's part of the marketing to adults, is you can sit down and read this thing rather quickly. And so the amount of stuff that I cut out, oh my gosh, there were so many scenes. So I had this scene where the four survivors are sitting around the campfire talking about movies. And I really wanted to keep that in there. And but it didn't move the story forward, but it said a lot about them. And that's the kind of thing, like if we were all on a deserted island and we had a campfire and not a lot of food and not all this time, we would be just talking about movies and it's that kind of the friendships that are building over the campfire and all that kind of, you have no TV, so you're going to talk about it.
It's sort of the Lord of the Rings. I just blanked on the character that's left out of every adaptation.
Tom Bombadil.
Tom Bombadil.
Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
So,
if the Lord of the Rings was YA, Tom Bombadil would not be in the book. He doesn't move the story forward at all, but he does show more of what the worlds of Middle Earth are like. There's another part of it. Ben, did you have something?
Yeah, so I took a crime and mystery fiction class in college last year, and one of the things, so the teacher, she talked about how she loves mystery and crime fiction, but she mostly reads YA. And her reasoning for it was it's often, as you said, quicker paced, but it's also shorter. So if a novel, 30, 40 years ago, a novel could be 160 pages. But today, a publisher won't publish a fantasy novel that's 160 pages. But if it's YA, they're not going to make you stretch that story out or put in a bunch of fluff. So that's one of the things she talked about is she's a parent, she's got work, she doesn't have time to sit there for 6 hours to read a novel, but she can read a YA book in an hour and a half. And so that was one of the things she pointed out. And then as you guys mentioned, the idea that some people just aren't comfortable reading detailed sex scenes. And they know that in the YA category, that's not going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And whether that's cultural and everything, and even the violence, there is some YA with a lot of gore, but mostly it's tame. I can think of there was an Aliens YA novel that came out last year. I can't remember the name of it, and it's first person. It's a teenage girl, all these things, but it doesn't have the gore that like a regular you would expect from an Aliens franchise novel. So those are just a couple of the things I heard from a college professor.
Yeah, speaking of the length, outside of YA, novellas are becoming more and more popular these days. Leslie, what you said about limiting any explicit sex scenes or much of that in a YA, that's one of the things that the publisher looks at, that they don't want that in a YA. It reminds me a bit of Smallville. There was plenty of adult sex after, from say year 5 onwards, when they got out of high school. But I remember there was an episode where Lana is talking to another character and about whether she should have sex with her boyfriend. She's a virgin, and I'm forgetting the name of that actress who's going to jail for 1,000,000 years. I'm trying to think of her character. Chloe. Chloe says, over the summer, I did, when I was in Metropolis interning at the Daily Planet, I did have sex with this guy, and for the first time, and it wasn't special. And they made a point of, when these kids were in high school, it was a steamy show, no doubt, but they made a point of sending the message of waiting,
Yeah, and it's funny. There's actually now, it's been I don't know if it's been just the last couple of years, but there's a trend in YA contemporary, not in YA speculative like what I write, but in YA contemporary, there's this sex positive movement that they want there's definitely a lot of, and I'm not going to say which one is the right thing to give to your teenage child.
Sure.
But there are definitely those stories where it's like, oh, I should have waited. It's like the cautionary tale. And then there are now these stories that a lot of agents are looking for to show maybe it happens off screen, but that it's not painted in a negative light. And I think maybe the reason why they're doing that is a lot of teens are doing that, and some of them have bad experiences, but a lot of them don't. And they wanted to show that side of life, like that, instead of always painting it as a taboo. And I don't know. I'm sure that's very controversial in a lot of different communities.
Would you regard the novel Ordinary People as young adult, about the boy who was, his big brother died in a boating accident and he lived, and he was just overcome with survivor guilt? This is
love that movie. I haven't read the book, but I've loved the movie.
In the book, he ends up, like, I don't know if he's a senior in high school. He has sex with his girlfriend, and they talk a little bit about it. Of course, they're not explicit at all. And it was actually a very positive thing in the book. It helped him tremendously to know that someone cared about him like that.
I bet that's why it was actually marketed as an adult book, even though there was a young, that the MC was young.
Of course, then you have Matt's favorite show, Riverdale, where the high school students are having sex every
Riverdale.
episode.
I just think that, Leslie, it looks as if, business folks, being as smart as they are to react to the public, right, to the consumers, it's there is a really big variability in readership, and you've got to try to find the product to fit in the right place. So I do get that.
Yeah.
And however, at some point that's got to clash, I think, with what the artist's vision is. And, to me, that's just really interesting. To not only is the story interesting, but how that story got to where it is published is interesting to me.
Well, and you had a second part to your question about whether or not I would ever write adult.
Oh, yes,
and
yes.
I right now it's just short fiction. So I wrote a story called Swamp Thing that ended up in Catterskill Basin Literary Journal. They're a literary journal, but they had a Halloween issue, so everything was a little Halloweeny, and I'm interested in trying to work on adult fiction in a short form. If I ever branch off into a full-blown horror novel, I kind of like to do that. It's just I have so many projects stacking up in my head. That's the adult horror novel is a little bit back, but I would love to do that. If I did it, I would probably pull out all the stops and then have to write under a pen name.
So let me ask you, Leslie, why short form? Why short form, Leslie?
It's actually just a practical reason right now, is that I do really respect the form. I think writing a good short story is a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
And I just want to work on it because it's an interesting puzzle. It's like writing a poem. It's short. It's also manageable. But for me, it's manageable, and time-wise, I've got a second grader. I've got I do freelance work, and I'm trying to write another book. And so I'm attracted to the idea of this project that I can finish.
You're a busy lady, right? You're a busy
3
lady.
weeks. Yeah. I could finish this short story, and it's not going to be this thing that drags on.
What is it? Prose? What is it? It's what's the old adage? Prose is the best words, or prose are words put in their best order. Poetry are the best words put in the best order, right?
That's pretty. Yeah.
Do you possibly see, on that note, do you see a possible short story, Leslie Lutz short story collection sometime in the future, adult?
Oh, that feels like I would love that. I would really need to have a lot. I'd had to be putting a lot of them out there.
Yeah.
And I like weird fiction. I like weird horror. I enjoy stories that aren't neatly tied up. And I would probably, edge in that direction for short fiction. So it would be, dread, lots of dread, lots of things happening off screen, but not because I'm censoring, but more I like to I think it's terrifying when you get the reader to fill in the gaps.
Yes.
They sometimes create such better monsters, if you just give them like a piece of it. So I think that's the way I would tend. But right now I would just love to spend a little more time writing, in addition to because I'm writing these YA novels, and then maybe submit to some anthologies and be in some really great anthologies. That would be my next step. But a whole collection, that feels like pie in the sky right now. I just can't even think that far ahead.
You can do it. I think you
can do it.
Well, that's the kind of short
but let me
fiction.
ask any of the authors here, right? And so Pete, right, Leslie. So this kind of, and I've said this before on this podcast many times. This trend in ambiguity, right, in horror fiction. Right? Does it absolve the author of having to do the work and put the onus on the reader? What's the responsibility of the author to at least provide some kind of resolution rather than just straight, ambiguity where this thing happens, I don't know why it happened, it just did, and I'm going to leave it up to the reader's mind to make it scary. I mean, for Pete or for Leslie.
So, I'm thinking about, when you end a story with a lot of loose ends, and then your beta readers hate it. you give it to your critique group, and they're like, "This is frustrating. This is This is a too many open-ended. Where are all these threads going?" Mm-hmm. That I guess would be. I mean, that's making the reader do way too much work. But to be able to leave it open, but give them enough to be satisfied, I think takes a lot of skill.
Yeah.
So I think it's an opportunity to let the reader take that story with them and keep writing it in their head.
That's a great, oh boy, that's a great statement. I'm thinking of Paul Tremblay's Head Full of Ghosts, right? When you read that, you keep writing that story in your head. So no, I think that's a great point. Pete, what do you think?
So what immediately comes to mind is Chambers' The Yellow Sign.
Okay.
Which is confusing from the beginning. It's confusing.
It is.
Yep. Confusing in the end. You don't really know what has happened in that story, but you know that you're creeped out by it.
Right. But let me ask you: does Lovecraft do that? When I read a Lovecraft story, I think I know what's going on by the end.
Yeah, I mean, well, so you fool, Warren is dead.
Yeah, no, I get it. You're talking about the statement of Randolph Carter, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Yep.
Do you believe the voice on the telephone or not? I'm not sure.
I just don't think things aren't that concrete, and they don't have to be so neat. I like the idea, like Leslie, of you don't quite know if the narrator is telling the truth. It's filtered through their experience. Maybe they're lying for a reason because they don't want to look bad. Or how do you know what really happened? It's like,
all right.
I don't know. I prefer that.
Yeah, that appeals to me too.
I'll give you two examples.
To get back to Lovecraft, the festival isn't actually explicit about everything that's going on. You have an idea.
Yeah.
There's this cult, or worms turning into humans or something. But it's still a lot to fill in.
It's a lot of atmosphere. The same thing with the night ocean. You don't really know what's going on. You just get this sense that there's this bigger, scarier universe out there that you never knew about.
Or like At the Mountains of Madness, which I read a couple of years ago. There's that. I mean, I know what happens to characters, but there was a lot of that was left unanswered.
Right.
At the end of that,
there's something that Danforth sees in the sky above the city.
Right.
That we don't know what it is.
And it drives them nuts.
But you explicitly know everything that went on before.
Right.
Yeah.
But the two things I'll mention is T.E. Klein's Ceremonies, and Picnic at Hanging Rock.
That is a lovely movie.
Gosh. It is a lovely movie. It's a really lovely book. But
you know, think about that. She made it up out of whole cloth. And there's still people who believe it really happened.
Right.
So, Leslie, if people start going looking for this island, you know you've made it.
Well, again, the name of Leslie's book is Fractured Tide. It's available in print and for
just
Kindle.
Bought a copy.
Yep.
Awesome.
And next month it will be available on Audible. I think it's June 23rd, if I remember correctly. Pick up a copy. Leslie, I really, really enjoyed it. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I mean, I really appreciate Blink and HarperCollins and K-Publicity for introducing me to you. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we try to make it fun, but also
how much did you pay her?
the faux complaint the faux complaint that I always get from listeners is that I'm spending too much of their money. They're buying more and more books, so which I don't think they actually mind. And yeah, a couple of quick things before we go. For those of you who watched our Ghost Stories thing the other night with Scott Thomas and Jeff Thomas, just like all of these episodes, I'll have that on audio soon if you want to listen on the go. And I'm getting so much email about that that people really enjoyed that. So we're going to do it maybe roughly once a month. So I conned Jeff and Scott into that. So that was really a lot of fun. People seem to enjoy it. And the other thing I wanted to say was I don't remember who recommended Invisible Man to me, but it was great. Watched it with Danielle and Logan the other night. So, yeah, your prize, Matt.
Remember, the prize this week is a copy of Wireless by Charlie Strauss. It has the amazing story, A Colder War, and some other stuff. Send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put Wireless in the subject heading. You'll be entered into our drawing. If you write your entry on a $20 bill, it helps.
All right, so pick up Fractured Tide. Again, if you prefer audiobooks, it'll be available next month. I do believe you can pre-order it already on Audible, if I remember correctly.
You know more than I do on that. I need to look at that.
I think
yeah,
so.
I actually pre-ordered it, so I can tell you
awesome.
It's possible.
Yay.
There you go. Next week, we have Jeffrey Ford. Week after that, we've got a no guest episode where we just babble, sort of like we're doing right now. Then Matthew Bartlett, Eddie Generous. You mentioned that you tweeted about Eddie Generous today.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a new book out.
Yeah, I haven't read that one yet, but I was on his show, Unnerving, and he's just a really nice guy.
Yeah.
So.
And then on the 28th of June, Paul Tremblay is going to come on the show and talk about his new book, Survivor Song, which I don't think is out yet, but will be shortly. Yeah, I think it's July 7th, something like that. And Paul emails me back and says, "Can I drag Stephen Graham Jones on with me too?" And I was like, "Yeah, Stephen Graham Jones has got a new book coming out too, The Only Good Indians, I think it is."
Yep.
So, and then July 5th, F. Paul Wilson. August 23rd, I got some holes to fill in there, but August the 23rd, some guy by the name of John Langan has a new book coming out. So we'll talk to him about that. So again, Fractured Tide by Leslie Lutz. Thank you very much, Leslie, for taking the time to come on the show.
No, it was great. Thank you so much.
So, all right, we have anything else before we need to go, guys? I'm going to watch The Wretched tonight. It looks good. So, You haven't seen it yet, Pete? I'm shocked. You just muted yourself, so if you're talking, I can't hear you.
I have not. I got Acorn free for 30 days.
Yeah.
So I'm watching every British mystery series that I've been trying to catch up on for the last 5 years.
I'm glad you said that, because it reminded me that I got Showtime free for 30 days to watch Penny Dreadful City of Angels.
Yeah.
It is fantastic, man. I think it's better than the Rick, you really liked the first 3 seasons of Penny Dreadful. Have you been watching this new one?
I haven't been watching the new one.
You have, or you haven't?
I may do what you did with Showtime.
Yeah.
But has it I don't think it's ended yet, right? It's still
no, it hasn't ended. It's 3 episodes in. Tonight they're airing the 4th episode. So if I would have been smart, I would have waited until, since I'm poor, I would have waited until next month.
Yeah, right. That's what I say. I want to do the 30-day thing. I want to wait till it ends.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, it's really, really great, and it's it's John Logan, I think, is the creator of that show, and so this could be considered a season 4, but he didn't feel, there's no pressure apparently from Showtime to do it in the 4th year, if that makes sense. You know, he was able to take his time writing it, and it's really, really good. It's about Santa Muerte and Magda, and it's set in 1938 Los Angeles. Kind of this race clash between the white folks who want to build a road through the Spanish or Mexican folks' neighborhood and destroy everything that they love. And Magda sets out to prove to Santa Muerte, who really doesn't give a damn because she's deaf, that mankind is essentially evil. You don't even have to make them do anything. You just have to whisper in their ear. So it's Natalie Dormer, and she's playing various. She's Magda, but she's playing various characters. That, like, one of them's whispering is assistant to the city councilman, and things like that, so on and so forth. It's really fascinating. I highly recommend it.
It sounds a little like what the 2nd season of True Detective should have been.
Yes, they should have waited. Absolutely.
But I mean, you had a construction plot. You had hints of Santa Muerte.
You know what it really reminds me of is the first chapter of Job in the Bible, where Lucifer and God are talking, and Lucifer is talking about Job, and God says to him, "Look what a great guy this guy is." I'm paraphrasing, of course. And Lucifer says, "It's only because you've given him all this stuff. If you take everything away from him, his wife, his family, his riches, you know, he'll curse you." And so that's what the book of Job is about. It kind of reminds me a bit of that in some ways. Anyway, I'm babbling on. Check it out. It's really good. And again, thank you for being on the show, Leslie. I really appreciate it. So.
No, I had a great time.
Great talking with you, and I'm really looking forward to your next book. So. All right, guys. We'll see everybody next week. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening. Night.
Right.